Well, let's go ahead and get started. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I think we
Okay,
can
good.
hear well. Yeah.
All right, so I had updated my OS recently and I ran into permission issues with trying to share in Zoom. So sorry for the delay. Let's go ahead and get started. Play from start. Okay, so welcome to the FHIR Connectathon 28th Consent Management Decision Enforcement Services and Computable Consent track. This is our track kickoff and introductions session. My name is Dwayne Bicudo. I'm one of the track leads. Mohammed Jafari is also on the call. Information related to our track can be found on Confluence. There's the link associated with this. And this presentation is already posted in our consent track on Confluence. And then during the day, you could, we're available or can be reached via FHIR chat. And I included the link below. The consent management track is largely educational for developers and their privacy advocates. This track follows previous consent management tracks in recent Connectathons. This track is focused on consent management, consent decision services, consent enforcement services, with a special emphasis this time on computable consents. An example being consents that record a patient's preferences in the form of machine readable rules. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that in our deep dive in session 2 today. A broad set of use cases are covered in this track, including patient privacy or consent to share information, consent for treatment, consent for research, and advanced care directives. Mohammed and I have been involved in the last 2 years working on a LEAP grant. That's a leading edge acceleration project that's funded by our country's Health and Human Services Office of the National Coordinator. And the goal here was to explore the uses or address specific use cases using FHIR consent. So we focused largely on privacy consent directive, and that's the agreement to collect, access, use, or disclose the sharing of information. Medical treatment consent directives, consent to undergo a specific treatment or to authorize the prescription of a specific drug, etc. And then research consent directive where patients participate in a research protocol and information sharing required in that flow. Originally, there were some areas that we were going to look at. They weren't within scope, and we did manage to spend a lot of time on advanced care directives, and that's consent for instructions for potentially needed medical treatment like DNR, like living will, like the portable medical order. We addressed all of those. And then we're here largely today as kind of an encore presentation. This is our 4th Connectathon addressing consent management, decision enforcement services, and now computable consent. But we're here largely because of a 1-month extension provided to us by the ONC to kind of close things up on the work that's been done. Additionally, within the LEAP grant, these services, the code base, and all these things will be up and available on the Google Cloud for roughly the next 2 years or until operational funding runs out. So we'll be able to continue to look at exercising or improving the consent decision service, look at new evolving use cases, and so forth. The implementation examples provided within this track are open source and are freely available, and were developed as part of that multi-year leading edge acceleration project. I like showing this this slide because it shows the long history of working on patient privacy and how things are moving quickly these last couple of years with other efforts in this area, not just the things that we've been involved in as a group, but the ONC Leap Consent Framework grant is definitely driving a lot of that. Our schedule today is, right now we're doing effectively just our kickoff, and we're going to talk about resources that are available to us. At 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to do a deep dive in consent management, computable consent. And then at end of day, we'll do a status update, and we'll answer questions and have some open discussion. On day 2, we'll do a morning touch point. Again, answer questions, open discussion. And then those of you participants who've brought any tooling in this area for consent management or a CDS or any tools in those areas will be given an opportunity to demonstrate them, and we'll have open discussion and identify any issues or recommendations regarding FHIR consent moving forward. And then at end of day, we'll do a closing touch point. We'll have some discussion, and then we'll either work together as a group or all Mohammed and I will complete the report out to the FHIR working group. Oops, let me go back. Okay. So what does our world look like from FHIR consent as far as the LEAD project is concerned? So there's some core components. The cornerstone piece is our consent decision service. It's able to consume a request for authorization from some application context. That application context may be a V2 message exchange. It may be eHealth exchange where we're requesting the exchange of CDAs. It may be a FHIR-based exchange where we're moving resources between organizations. The consent decision service is able to, from that request, identify information related to that, specific to the patient. They're able to discover that patient across multiple consent stores, bring those consent resources back in and determine, make a recommendation, either permit, deny, or permit with obligations, and return that response back to that enforcement service that's being driven by that application context. And then one of the later pieces that we plugged in was a consent management service, and we developed a UI for demonstration purposes. It shows a patient being able to create their patient privacy consents, their advanced care directives, respond to informed consent for medical treatment, and participate in clinical research. So we'll go through a lot of those flows in the deep dive. The consent decision service, this is a more detailed view of that. Maybe Mohammed, you'd like to speak to this one?
Yes. So the consent decision service is the portion of this architecture that generates the decision for, basically moves from a consent to an authorization decision. The rough view of the flow is that it receives that there is an API interface that supports various, like right now, there's two different interfaces that we support, the XACML interface and the clinical decision support hooks. But eventually through one of these interfaces, it receives the context of access. And that includes the identifier of the patient, purpose of use, and other details optionally provided about the context of the workflow. This gets consumed by the query processor. It's basically, it turns that into a internal representation of the query. Based on that query, there is a consent discovery module that is activated. It goes around and looks for the pertinent consents by the patient through various consent stores. So it retrieves all these consents that are potentially applicable, and it examines them more thoroughly to find the final list of applicable consents. It ensures that the consents are valid, they're within their validity period, they're active, etc. And also they match the context of the workflow. For instance, if the context of the workflow is a payment purpose of use, a treatment consent would not apply. So after that, the provision structures of the applicable consents are processed by matching that against the context of the query, ultimately leading to a permit or deny decision from the consent provisions. And then optionally, there might be obligations, especially in the case of permit, there might be obligations that apply. One particular obligation that we support now is, and we have implemented that, is a redaction obligation to remove certain parts of the information if they're more sensitive than the user is allowed to receive. So those obligations are also extracted from the consent provisions, and they're also combined into a final decision per consent. And then there is a conflict resolution module that handles the edge case wherein we have different decisions coming from different consents. Right now, the algorithm that we have implemented is to basically look at the most recent consent, if there are different consents that are filed by the patient and applied to the context of the workflow. But it is a configurable situation where we can have other policies to handle any conflict. So this is just a broad overview of the consent decision service. And then, so this slide kind of shows that from a more high level perspective, the request comes in from a consent enforcement service component residing in some application context. It could be, for instance, an exchange scenario, a research workflow, etc. And the consent enforcement service is in charge of being in that native environment and collecting that information and putting that into the form of a request to the consent decision service. The crucial points are the type of workflow, purpose of use, patient identifier, and optionally additional information about the type of data that's being accessed. And the response usually is a consent decision, whether it's a permit or deny, if there's obligations or caveats that apply. And also we provide a decision rationale, basically a reference to the consent that ultimately authorized the access or was the basis of the authorization. This is something that the client on the enforcement side might need to record for legal purposes or for bookkeeping purposes.
So I'll go ahead and continue
Right.
on here. So the second key component in what we're covering here in this track is the consent management service. And basically it's a suite of services, including a UI for the patient to analyze, to create, to revoke, to reinstate and to audit consents, storing them in a form of a FHIR consent resource inside a FHIR consent repository. And what we've done here effectively is we've created a implementation of modeling it after the requirements for the state of Arizona. We've actually generated some test patients, including their clinical data, so that we can actually create these consents and demonstrate them to you, or for you to actually look at this code and learn from it, what the possible ways of actually creating some of these consents could be. So we've addressed all the use cases inside of the UI and the consent management services. It's really there's kind of a common flow within the UI on how we do that. Basically, we've got a suite of management services. We've got a questionnaire and e-signature flow, which generates a human readable PDF that is digitally signed through the custodians using the custodian certificate. There's a phase where the patient reviews, accepts, and validates what it is that they've requested. And in the case of Arizona, there's a advanced care directives optional notary flow for living will, power of attorney, for healthcare, as well as mental health. The meat of it is that ultimately that flow creates a questionnaire response, a FHIR questionnaire response resource that captures each one of the questions that were answered. It creates a FHIR consent where we attach that human readable as a document attachment, and we create via a FHIR extension, a FHIR consent extension, a link to the questionnaire response. And then ultimately it produces the provenance with the target of that FHIR consent for integrity purposes. There is a hook in there through CDS. One thing we didn't mention is that CDS also audits each one of the authorization requests that occur for a decision to permit, deny, or permit with obligations. So we can see some of those within the UI that are specific to a given patient. Resources available to our developers and implementers. This is all part of, again, this is an open source project. So it's available out on San Diego Health Connect's GitHub lead project area. And the code that we're looking at within this track for the next 2 days are the LEAP consent UI, and I provided that link, as well as the consent decision service. And then we have several services that are currently up in the cloud running for demonstrations and for your use during the Connectathon. We have our LEAP consent UI, and we've got a suite of test users that you can log in with. We have the consent decision service, and we're running Happy FHIR up in the Google Cloud. And then there is another hook that the LEAP consent management UI utilizes as part of analyzing the patient's record, and that's the security labeling service. So there's a service out there for that as well. We've created from the UI example FHIR consents. So we took our demo patient one and we've created a DNR, a living will, a power of attorney for healthcare, for mental health, a patient privacy FHIR consent, which addresses an exchange between the patient's primary clinic and its healthcare information exchange. We have a portable medical order out there, and a treatment, consent for treatment, where the patient has approved the prescribing of an antidepressant. And then we've got a clinical research flow for pre-diabetics that's put on by Arizona State University. Test messages for those authorizations requests. In other words, we can exercise those consents and see what we get. I've got examples that are available on GitHub as well. There are 23 of them. For those of you who are familiar with Postman, I've created a collection that you can actually execute all the use cases for this track by just running it through the Postman collection capability. And then we've generated a suite of test patients. We've associated those with users. These were generated with Cynthia in the state of Arizona, and all are 50 plus, and that kind of ties into our use cases for clinical research and so forth. All of them have a password, so it's pretty simple. And the users are demo 2 through demo 10. There is a demo 1, but let's refrain from using that because I'm going to use that for demonstration purposes during our sessions. Our testing objectives, basically this is our test suite. And there's a JSON authorization request associated with each one of those. There are 23 tests. Each one of them, and they are grouped into patient privacy, advanced care directives, treatment, research, DNR, and post. There's some bonus activities where we'd like to see orchestration of access to the resulting questionnaire response. I'm going to demonstrate how to do that as part of my demonstration on day 2. This pretty much covers everything for our first sessions. Are there any questions out there?
So if there are no questions, I was wondering if we could also go around the room and have a brief introduction from the participants as well.
That would be great. So, Mohammed, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll just go down the list? It's pretty short.
Okay, so I'm Mohammed Jafari. I am the project director of the LEAP consent. And Dwayne and I are here to host this track. I also host the track for the data segmentation for privacy in FHIR, which is a parallel track. We'll be meeting in half an hour. Maria?
Hey there, this is Maria Moen. Dwayne and I have had a number of conversations. I am the use case lead for the Advanced Directive Interoperability with FHIR, and just love the work you guys are doing, and I'm just staying as close to it as I can around leading my own track. So I'll be hit and miss today, but I want to stay close to what you guys are doing and marvel at all the good work.
Good to see you, Maria.
Thank you. Farai?
So, hi everyone. All right, so my name is Farai. I'm a senior software developer at HISP, South Africa. So my interest in this track is that we are in the process of designing a consent server on behalf of the Ministry of Health in South Africa. And we're hoping to position it as the go-to consent platform, for EMR access, where patients will actually provide consent to healthcare providers across the spectrum. So I'm very, very excited by what I've seen so far, and I'll really be looking forward to to seeing what you guys have done, and perhaps take some learnings from what you've done and apply it to our use case. So I think for us, our use case is very, very simple, where essentially we are looking at patients, and this is really in the public healthcare space. Taking control of the healthcare records and providing consent to healthcare providers. So if you have any recommendations, best practices, and maybe more material that I can look at around that, I really appreciate. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Farai. Jerry.
Yeah, I'm Jerry Goodman, one of Dwayne's colleagues and the editor of the service functional model on consent management services. It's been an outgrowth of this work. And I guess it's in trial use at this point. So that's about it.
Thanks, Jerry. Kathleen, did you want to say a word?
Yeah, hi everyone. I work with Dwayne and Mohammed over the years on both consent and security labeling, and I'm a co-chair of the security work group. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathleen. Linda?
Hi, Linda Huxma. I'm a informatician and clinician, nurse practitioner by background. I've been working with Maria as part of the PASIO Advanced Directives project here for the last 6 months or so. So I'm just attending to continue to learn more about the intersection of how all of this works and the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Linda. Rosemary, are you on the call?
Yes, hi, Mohammed. Rosemary from ONC. I'm the project officer for the Lead Consent project or grant that Mohammed and Dwayne are chairing and leading. And Kathleen, it's good you're on the call. So it's been an ongoing process. Very, very interested in always hearing anything to do with consent, because it's been one of those topics that since I joined ONC in 2015, we've been trying so hard to get to the crux of the matter. So I think this project has done a lot of improvements, a lot of progress, thanks to the efforts of a lot of participants. And so it's just a pleasure to always listen in and take a couple of insights back to ONC, and also to keep the work of consent moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's all, Dwayne, from what I see in the roster here.
Yeah, I think that's it. So our next session is kind of geared for the developer. And we will go through the consent management flow, but I want to get to a point where we are actually exercising those consents. So we're actually going to run the test suite against our demo patient one, and we're going to make some modifications to it, their consents, and we're going to look at behavior at those points. Since this is kind of our encore presentation of consent management, decision, and enforcement services, and now computable consent, I do want to make sure that I kind of do a handoff to the community of what these components are doing, where to get the code, and how to move it forward in the future. So looking forward to seeing you there at 1 p.m. Eastern. If we have no more questions or comments, I think we can go ahead and end this session.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Thanks,
Hey,
Dwayne.
Mohammed, did you invite them to the security track though, just in case they're interested, since they're so connected?
Yes, so the DS4P track, this is the track we have on security labeling and data segmentation for privacy in FHIR. The kickoff will be in 20 minutes at the top of the hour. So if you're interested, I'll meet with you there.
All right, thanks.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.